So in this next lesson, we're going to go ahead and solve using systems of equations, but we're going to use the elimination method. Now, the great thing with that, what we talked about before, is we have to find opposites. So for example, if we wanted to use x, we would say, okay, I'm looking at 6x. Well, what would be the opposite of 6x? So I have 6x, and the opposite of that is negative 6x. But in order to start that, and this is where systems of equations gets tricky, we have to turn things into opposites. It's what makes it great, but it also makes it a little difficult at times. Well, what I said in the previous video was that we have to find a variable that's by itself. But as you can see here, there's no variable by itself. It has what we call a coefficient in front of it, meaning a number next to the variable. So in that case, we have to make the opposite. But it's actually pretty cool because we can do that with this. So I'm going to use x. Now, if you want to see what the problem would look like if we canceled out y, go ahead and click the link below right now, and that will take you to the problem when solving it or canceling out our y's first. But either way, it doesn't matter. Your answers will all be the same at the end if you do it correctly. I'm going to go ahead and for this video, I'm going to cancel out the x's. So what I'm going to do is multiply everything by -3. Why -3? Well, because if I multiply -3 times 2x, it will give me a -6x, which will make the opposites for this equation, which will allow me to cancel out my x's. Now, a lot of times students ask, well, why do you even have to do that? Because we have two variables in the equation right now, and you can never solve for an equation when there's two variables in there. So this is allowing us to just use one variable. So if I do -3 times 2x, I get my -6x. Great. -3 times -4y gives me a positive 12y. And that equals -3 times 20, which is a -60. Great. Now, systems of equations tells us to go ahead and add down. Here's the wonderful thing about this. When they're opposites, all they do is cancel out. So now you're left with -8y plus 12y, because systems of equations tells us to add down. So we have -8y plus 12y. Well, if you know adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers, you would know that that is positive 4y equals 44 plus -60 would give us a -16. If you're having a hard time with that, it's a good idea to probably review some adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers. Then we have to solve for the variable. That's what we did. You see how it cancels everything out and it gives us one variable to solve for. So we divide everything by 4 because we want to, in algebra terms, it's called isolating the variable. And it's just a harder way of saying getting the variable by itself. These cancel out and you're left with y, and y equals -16 over 4, which is just -4. Great. Now, if you get this and you say, okay, I'm done, you actually have a few more steps to go. So we'll do step 2 after you get your answer. Step 2, plug in value. So what that means is you want to go ahead and plug in the value that you got for y. So whatever we got here, we want to plug that back into any one of these two equations. So you can plug it into this equation or you can plug it into that equation. But it has to be the original equation. I'm going to go ahead and just do the top one, but it does not matter. Okay, so I have 2x minus 4, and I have my y right here, but instead of putting the y, I'm going to put an open parentheses equals 20. I always tell my students to do this. Now, what I would want to do is I'm going to say that instead of putting in a y, I'm going to put in what y equals, and that would be -4. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to put my -4 there. Now do you understand where this is all coming from? Now I just have one variable here, which will allow me to solve for x, which will be able to have my answer in x and y form. So to go ahead and keep solving, I have my 2x, and what I'm going to do is multiply negative 4 times negative 4. It gives me a positive 16 equals 20. And then I subtract 16 to both sides. That cancels out, and I'm left with 2x is equal to positive 4. I divide by 2, and I can see that x is equal to 2. Good. So what you want to do after this, if you're taking a test, I would take these two numbers and I would plug 2 in for x on one of my equations and 2 in, or negative 4 in for y on the same equation, and see if everything works out. If it does, then your answer will be in xy form, meaning you'll have 2 and negative 4, just like a point. X, y. So that's why the 2 goes here and the negative 4 goes there. And that would be your answer, but that's one of the things we definitely want to do in order to see to solve this by the elimination method.